Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. I am your host, my name is Joel, and with me as always is your other host, the cromulent
Brian. Hi.
How are you, Brian?
Yeah, fine, perfectly cromulent. And
this week we are talking about episode 14 of season 4 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Goodbye Iowa.
So Goodbye Iowa was written by Marty Noxon and directed by David Solomon. David Solomon we had last with Beer Bad, and Marty Noxon we had last with Doomed. And this was first aired on February the 15th, 2000, one day late for love. Okay, so here is your Buffy summary. Riley discovers the gang's protection of Spike and becomes distrustful. Adam dissects a child. Riley becomes disorientated. Maggie's vitamins were something more. Okay, here's the full. There's no punctuation in the sentence. Riley becomes disoriented. Maggie's vitamins were something more.
Yeah, well, that makes sense to me.
In room 314, Adam boasts to Buffy, Xander, and Riley of his kinship with Riley, and then stabs Riley non-fatally. Tara sabotages a demon-seeking spell. That is just a collection of sentences.
And for this summary, the most important plot point was Riley is unhappy about Spike being in Giles' apartment.
Bizarre.
The most important thing that happened in the episode. So I think in terms of our bronze banter this week, it's probably best that it's probably best that in retrospect that we settle on having these tracks in the bronze, because otherwise this could be our weekly time at Willie's place. But we're a bit light. We're really getting into day 10,000 of quarantine, where we haven't really done a lot since the last time we've recorded. We did go outside to a park.
It was state sanctioned, though. We're allowed to at this point.
State sanctioned, and that was exciting for us, but mostly involved sitting in the sun doing nothing. But what I did discover was something which is the kind of thing which is dear to my heart, which is a new reality show on Netflix, which is in that category of incredibly niche kind of professional teams competitions. So in the past we have devoured things like the Arrangement, which is about floral arranging.
That was awful.
Blown Away, which is about the
glassblower
craftsmanship. Craftsmanship. That's what we need to look into. And this is the big...
Making it is probably a big one too.
Making it, yes. Although I feel like in Making It with Amy Poehler and Nick Offerman, the category of people who make things is quite broad.
Well, in this, we're talking about flowers and sculpting with flowers. And the category of who should be sculpting with flowers is also quite broad, because there are people there who are like, I've never touched a flower before. Sure.
So this program, let's name it, it's called Big Flower Fight. It's probably the last time we're going to call it by its correct name. I think we have referred to it as the British Flower Fight. Big Flower Competition was something I said to someone the other day as well. But yeah, so essentially you have people designing gardens, you have people designing big midsummer Wicker Man like sculptures out of grasses, and it's a very odd program, and it has very odd energy, so it's one of the reasons I enjoy it. But as you said, usually if you take a Blown Away or something like that, you have glass blowers, and there's only probably about 15 of them in that country, and 13 of them are on the show. So it's a very specific thing they've really kind of put all their stat points into. With this show, it's just a load of different people whose backgrounds might lend themselves to being able to do something with flowers. So you have obviously florists, you have floristry students, you have I think one of the couple's profession was houseplant organizers. You have people who are
from LA, would you believe?
Yeah. You have people who are artists but haven't worked with flowers. So people who do sculpture or, metalwork or things like that. And so it's a really interesting dynamic for me, because usually it's like, oh, I've never had to do this I've never had to sew a dress on Drag Race under this pressure before, but now people are like, I've literally never heard of this plant before, or this kind of plant, or heard of a tree, and now I have to make a raccoon out of it. So what have you been enjoying?
On Netflix.
It's on Netflix. What have you been enjoying about it, Brian?
It's been good fun. It's just like kind of like a soothing, British approach to reality TV, competition TV, where like, as opposed to taking it extremely seriously, they kind of take a bit of a chill, everyone's friends approach, a la Bake Off. But I suppose, because they didn't really do competitions previous to that, as opposed, like, in the same way, you had like Pop Idols and whatever, American Idol, whatever they had for that.
Yeah.
But like stuff like that. But that wasn't really competition. That was more
discovering
spectacle.
people in a way.
Yeah. Or the other one would obviously be like Four in a Bed and what you call it? Come Dine With Me. Both of which are of course incredibly hostile, but it's only because it's worth absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So people get really petty about it. But yeah, this kind of like, it's a bit more gentle. It's not the kind of thing you find in US reality TV that much, is that kind of camaraderie and
no villains really in this kind of villains, reality.
Except in that season of Bake Off where the old woman didn't take an ice cream thing out of a freezer, and Ofcom, which is the British complaints for like broadcasting standards office, got something in the region of, I think it's the Office of Communications, is it? Anyway, whatever. Got something in the region of like 10,000 complaints about this woman taking this guy's ice cream out of a freezer.
The accusation was she had essentially caused his bake to be ruined.
Yeah, and then she didn't come back ever after that because she like lost her taste buds or something crazy.
She had a bag full and then she couldn't taste anymore, which I think was unrelated, but it was all bizarrely dramatic. And yeah, so like
spoilers for Bake Off in 2013.
Yeah, I'm so jazzed when these things come up, particularly when they come up organically, because they're a rare bird. But it also specifically, it's always like this weird combination of they have an expert, quote unquote, judge who I'm sure is an expert within that field, but of course I've no idea not only who they are but also the things they're referring that they've done I've never heard of before.
Of course.
So they bring kind of trying to prove themselves energy to it. And the two hosts are Vic Reeves, who you have no idea who this is, but Vic Reeves was is a British comedian who has been doing kind of absurdist, kind of surrealist stuff with his partner Bob Mortimer for like 25-30 years.
And he wasn't in Hot Fuzz.
No, he wasn't in Hot Fuzz.
Okay, he was.
He was not. No.
Okay.
He was not in Hot Fuzz, but for Shooting Stars, which was a game show which was out in the 90s, which was where Matt Lucas got his start, he was on that. He's just very, very wholesome for me, very much part of my childhood. And the Natasha Dimitriou, Dimitriou.
Okay.
Natasha Dimitriou, who is the woman who's on the What We Do in the Shadows TV show, for example, is probably the thing people know her best for. And they're just kind of like, as he's like, not really taking it too seriously. Yeah,
that's good.
There's a wholesome father-son team who's like really like trying to make mum proud and kind of been really like, it's okay to cry, son, but you're doing really well, so don't worry about it too much.
Disgusting.
There's gays. There's a very there are gays. Yeah, I'm trying
to remember. Oh, there are gays.
The Irish couple. Yeah. There's a trans woman gardener who has like a very specific like approach and like to her like years of expertise and how she's like training her apprentice who's there with her as well, and they both live in a cottage in some kind of like Miss Hungy kind of situation.
They're just gal pals. Okay.
Gal pals, yeah, but who they live in a cottage on their in the garden they maintain like the proper kind of the national garden. I actually now follow them on Instagram.
Naturally,
yeah. So it's all very wholesome. I was really.
I saw that the twinkiest person there. I was found their Instagram earlier, and I was like, oh, weird. Already following them. That's Joel's Instagram account. So
okay, well, just put that out there, I suppose. Yeah,
I'll bleep it out if you want.
So I think there's a lot of really good focus on cultivation. Much as in the mystery is cultivated in this episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Goodbye Iowa, which, as you said, as you haltingly described in that collection of sentences, is really about kind of transitioning from the build up to the big bad to Agam is here. What is Agam? Why should we care? And I think really putting the initiative through a kind of transfiguration from what like it's fundamentally a different organization after this episode, because Riley's position within it changes, the tone of the interactions from Forrest and Graham change, and obviously the two adults really who were there are killed.
Yeah.
And obviously Adam takes some control after this, but really it is portrayed, I think, a little bit like Dr. Engelman and Dr. Walsh, where the two adults who survived the plane crash, and once they're gone, it's kind of Lord of the Flies a bit. There's kind of lack of control over it. So yeah, what did you make of the episode, Brian?
Yeah, it didn't. I actually quite enjoyed it versus kind of like a couple of more previous episodes. I did think it was a bit messy though overall. I really liked it. I of course deeply adore the Frankenstein elements here. So Adam has wandered out into the world. He has been created and he's immediately killed his creator. He is deep in existential questioning. He he meets a young boy in the forest and says, "What am I?" And the boy says, "You're a monster." He says, "What are you?" And he says, "I'm a boy." And it's very specifically, so obviously this is a like very clear Frankenstein reference, but apparently specifically to the 1931 Boris Karloff Frankenstein, which I haven't seen. But that's like, very note for note take on that. But what I really like about this is that it doesn't in any way go for the stereotypical or commonly understood approach to Frankenstein. It very much takes the Frankenstein of Mary Shelley's novel. I read a really great essay earlier on today when doing some research for this episode, which was called "Of Creatures and Creators, Buffy Does Frankenstein" by Anita Rose. And that whole thing is basically all about Adam. It doesn't touch on Irma when she was bad, not when she was bad. Some assembly required. It just goes for Adam as a character and looking at the confluences between that and the Mary Shelley novel. So obviously Frankenstein as a novel kind of came in the wake of kind of this post-Renaissance romantic era rejection of undemocratic and kind of like overly rational Enlightenment kind of thinking towards a more kind of like Byronic romantic figure that I think by and large Shelley rejects as part of her kind of structure. So that Frankenstein comes to represent in the novel questions of identity in the face of construction, in the face of maybe even a lack of a creator that isn't God, to some degree. An anxiety in this kind of like new industrial era where, what if machine exists, what is man? What is man's purpose? And and then there's like tenderness, familiar relationships, all these things, all of which I think transpose really beautifully onto this episode of Buffy and the season of Buffy. So this season of Buffy obviously has loads of identity questioning and lots of inspection of the family unit. One of the things that both this essay and Mark Field highlight are the two family structures within this episode. So obviously you have the initiative, which has that kind of really brothers in arms kind of feel to it, where it's you've put a bunch of killing machines into a room and said, oh, you have to protect each other, your family, and they unquestionably do so, and they reject. And in this episode, Riley is talking to Adam at one point, and he says, our mother, we were our mother's favorite children, me and you, him and Riley basically. And he says, she's not my mother. And he says, well, she installed your operating system and she taught you how to interact, and also she pumped you full of fucking drugs. But you
have a birth mother, but she was in practice the mother figure.
Yeah, exactly. And what Mark Field suggests is that whole structure is really, really fragile and very inorganic. It's very forced together, very constructed in the same way that in Frankenstein you have Frankenstein the monster come back to Frankenstein and asking him to create him a wife. In this kind of sense of you can just force this kind of close relationship or this kind of interaction, and instead, and in comparison, you have a very specifically organic family group. So Joss Whedon has said a couple of times that he thinks the found family is more significant as a structure than a classically structured family. Nuclear family, for sure. And then he goes at great lengths to explain that he doesn't mean that he's not close to his blood relations, but he's like, I always think blood's not that important, etc., etc. But in the Scoobies, you have people who have come together on the basis of their deeply caring for each other with a genuinely earned father figure, a leader who's not that father figure, who's Buffy, all this stuff. And that tension between the kind of inorganic and organic found families is a real center point for the season, which is great. Love it.
Yeah, like a massively motivating factor, and I think it's something that you're absolutely right that in the original text and the kind of the core Frankenstein mythology, is very central, is how articulate and how contemplative Frankenstein's monster is, and it's something which oftentimes when you do have incredibly foundational and archetypal monsters like the Frankenstein, quote unquote, like
most specifically Frankenstein's monster,
and like the werewolf or the vampire, etc. When you start mass producing either vampires as a monster in a setting or replicating it in a different story, there's a certain flattening of the motivation there, and it often reduces, say, the Frankenstein type monster to really only slightly more complex than a zombie, so, as something which has a very base drive, whereas in the Frankenstein, the text, as he said, it's like a lot of that imagery of him being
staring out into nature and contemplating his own existence and his own how he came to be and why he is and what he is. And like
violence is a tool that, I think obviously Adam is definitely a much more like malevolent character ultimately, but again, it's the violence is not indiscriminate. It's Adam opens up this boy to see how he works on the inside and thought he was beautiful, and there's an amorality to that rather than necessarily evil. There's
one of the ways to understand yourself is to do violence onto the outside world, to define yourself from it. So all that's really fascinating. One of the other aspects there is just the extreme tension that there is in this episode and this season that we've discussed many times about the tension between science and magic. So I think and that's very much present in Frankenstein as the novel, which is in the sense that Shelley is kind of like looking at indiscriminate and unfeeling science as in that kind of like enlightenment being the period kind of from mid 17th century until kind of like a very early 19th century, depending on your definitions, etc. And all these period kind of things, especially when it comes to thought, philosophy, and art, they occur in different places at different times. So it's really hard to define. But Enlightenment, where reason became the most important thing. So you had people like for the first time saying things like Christianity Not Mysterious by John Toland, which is a text that's actually from a guy who went to the same college as us, which is nice. But he basically said that Christianity could be understood, and this is like an extremely heretical thing to say because, because religion is crazy. But
we've just lost our deeply devoutly fundamentalist religious fan base.
Awful. Yeah. And then with the Romantic era and romantic with a capital or not in the sense of like romantic love, but romantic in the sense of seeing passion and beauty as being driving ideals, rather than this kind of harsh Enlightenment reason, which kind of led to the symbolic guillotines in the French Revolution. And you have your individualism kind of like rises up in that time. So you have your classic symbols of the Byronics, like artist standing on a hill, and that being the driving force of a text. And I think this episode also like identifies a lot of differentiation in this season as well between kind of like individualism and collectivism and kind of the conflicts between the self and the organization, and like
it's actually quite a dense season in terms of those kind of politics and those kind of maybe more complex thematic tributaries than in previous seasons, which were quite effective, were quite foundational and quite archetypal in terms of like love, loss, grief, that kind of thing. And I think in particular the tension, as you mentioned, between magic and science is not incidental in the season. It's very much written into how everything is approached, and it's very much part of the Frankenstein mythology in the sense of a lot of those earlier science fictional or horror texts are very much framed in the sense that by contrast, we say the initiative's approach is that science explains all and disregards magic as lesser, as superstitious, and the supernatural is superstitious. Where in contrast, in Frankenstein, what Dr. Frankenstein does is treading on an area that's meant to be sacrosanct religiously in terms of God's ability to grant life, and spiritually in terms of it transgressing the boundaries of things that are meant to be immutable, like if you can make a man, can you unmake a man? If you can make an identity, these things are meant to be.
Also, I think one of Frankenstein's great sins is like abandoning his child immediately.
And just exactly the collapse of the societal, the familial unit. But what science does in Frankenstein is exceeds its bounds and goes outside of, at the time, what would have been seen as science, while obviously very developed and growing very quickly, was still, it had its box to stay in. It had boundaries, and other areas like say religion would have been seen as just as, if not more potent and more valid for society and for the average person in terms of explaining things. Where now, generally speaking, science has taken a much more predominant role in the world. So we have a reversal where, even in this episode where you have Tara and Willow using the magic demon finding spell, and the idea that it can categorize by color which demon is which and where they are in the town, that's a certain factual approach to things, which arguably could be seen as treading now on science's domain in terms of putting structure rather than interpretation to some of the occultism that they perform.
And that's actually been like, I think in some ways where I think that's a natural growth, because Willow really has approached all of her magics with a sense of the scientific, because she is a scientist and she is she's a hackers. So she's approached with a very rigorous and dogmatic approach, which means that she can apply some sense of control to this kind of magic. Well, until she can't, of course, but her ability to integrate the two is far greater than the rigid and unmoving cold science that the initiative, thank you, represents, and that kind of like military industrial complex anxiety that it also represents.
And I think it's something in terms of, for Willow's development, something which we maybe shouldn't underestimate, is it's Jenny Callender's legacy. It's very much that idea of the techno-pagan, but kind of taken to fruition, which Willow's grown into, in that she is not afraid to invoke certain powers or do certain things because she sees them as measurable, and she sees for a scientific approach to experimentation, which isn't about necessarily personal power, again, not yet, but it's about kind of furthering her knowledge. I think it's important to remember that for Agam, Agam's a three-way intersection of different forces, because he is demon, human, and cybernetic. He's a biomechanical demonoid, but there's elements of all three of those conflicts within him. So he is, I think, by far
he's the messiest and in some ways the most complex big bad.
Yeah, and arguably to date, and with the exception of obviously kind of Willow later in season 6, maybe one of the most sympathetic big bags in terms of his origin, because he is, up until kind of he goes a little massacre-y, it's not really his fault. He has kind of been put into this position. He's been like Maggie Walsh, whose motivations I feel are still a little unclear in terms of why she created him.
Well, she has a plan. We'll find out what it is at some point in the future. And maybe we'll forget about it. She obviously bears a huge responsibility for this, and in a way that maybe, particularly when we construct this idea within Buffy of the soul being equated with the conscience, and in some ways with the responsibility, she is the ensouled person in this situation who has deliberately created Agam, who I don't think can fall well into that hierarchy. And I think his actions flatten a little bit as the seasons go on and just become a little power grabby, like many villains. Well, he only appears in 2 more episodes after this, as far as I can remember. I might be completely wrong here, but I think he only appears in He obviously appears in Primeval. No,
Restless.
Primeval. No, Restless is the final episode of the season, and Primeval is the conclusion of the arc.
I suspect it might be the other way around.
Well, Restless is like sleepy. You're restless in your sleep. That's
Sure,
the dream episode.
And Primeval, like, anyway, look,
Primeval is because they're
really
calling on
just-
the
we should
Primeval
really just
Powers and
check
Slayers.
this.
Well, I can do it right now. And he's in, like, I mean, another
He's
episode.
in Superstar. I remember that
Is he in Superstar?
because I remember that I have a specific rogue memory of him realizing something has changed.
Okay, he's in the Yoko Factor. That's what I remember. And yeah, Primeval is the conclusion, and then Restless is the final episode of the season. So
Okay.
Restless is the amazing one, and Primeval is also there.
I may have read a misattributed reference on the Wikipedia then.
Oh, really? Oh. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is just, the deep existential issues within this episode and how it represents the issue for the season as a whole. Mark Field actually wrote really well about this. He wrote, like, I loaded up my tablet today to read the Mark Field entry for this episode, as I do every week. And it was 13 pages, and I was like, Mark, why? But I found out like 3 of the pages were like a quote about panopticism, and I was like, I already know that shit, it's fine. So I think we've talked about panopticism before. It's the Foucauldian idea of there being a prison at the center, a circular prison at the center of which there's a guard who are in a room with the light on, where you can never actually see the guard, but the guard can see into all the different prison rooms, whatever, cells, thank you. And with that, the prisoners at all points, regardless of whether or not they are actually actively being watched, feel the social pressure of being watched, and that influences their behavior to act in accordance with what is deemed appropriate. This is kind of like in Foucault. We actually have a panopticon prison quite close to us, which is pretty cool. It's a really old prison called Comenham Jail, GAOL, or as one time I was out for a run, which is hilarious in itself, but some American tourists stopped me and they're like, can you point us to Comenham Gaol?
Yeah.
Gaol? And I was like, Comenham Jail? And they're like, no, it's Gaol. And I was like, that's another spelling for jail.
Yeah, I can point you to a couple of gaels.
Yeah. Anyway, but it's really cool. If you ever get a chance to go to it, you should, especially if you can get there during Pride, because they do a queer history tour of the jail, because a bunch of disgusting homosexual vagrants were imprisoned there in the 19th century.
For lewd acts.
So, but yeah, as a metaphor, what the panopticon represents is the social pressure on everyone to act in accordance with feeling like they're constantly being watched by society and made to act certain ways. So that translates into this episode quite well, because you have Riley, who is so specifically been conditioned by society and by Maggie Walsh to perform a certain way, to have certain values, and those values are very quickly being stripped away. So where you have Buffy, the hero, the self-determining individual who has rejected the welcoming embrace of that kind of collectivism. A couple episodes go by questioning too much what was going on. Riley has fully bought into this kind of into the industry. What's it called?
The military industrial complex.
No, what the initiative?
Okay, sorry.
No, don't worry. There was absolutely no way that I could have forgotten that twice. So, Riley fully bought into the ways of the initiative, and his identity was purely based on that. It's completely been stripped away now, and his withdrawal in this episode is not just from drugs; it's from the life he knew and the fact that he has no identity. He has crumbled.
I think it's interesting that they include a note for Agam to say that, obviously Riley had a birth mother, because I think it probably presents the question, is Riley real at all? Yeah, no,
and like this, it's such a funny like character moment for him, like having him trying to give them this character of like, oh shit, we maybe wrote him a bit too stringent. We need to like loosen him up a bit and make him a bit crazy.
Yeah, she looks like at this point, when he's kind of like losing it, he's in his military vest, he has that hair parting, he looks like a Resident Evil character. Yeah.
So Maggie Walsh very specifically represents these kind of social structures and these social pressures, because as Mark Field said a couple of times, a couple of episodes ago in A New Man, she's talking to Giles and she says, like, literally about Buffy, she's very self-reliant, very independent, which is not always a good thing. I think it can be unhealthy to take an adult take on adult roles too early. Which, I mean, taking on adult roles too early, sure, absolutely. But being too independent of a thinker, taken in this new context of how she actually approaches people, control, and selfhood, is like a huge warning sign about the dangers of allowing society and what you've been told as being appropriate to determine your identity. I think we're going to find it. I think Buffy's identity is going to be hugely called into question in the upcoming episode, which is This Year Is a Girl, which I think might be a Elvis Costello reference. We'll find out closer to the time. But because, of course, she's going to completely lose her identity and her body and her life to Faith, which is going to be great. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I think there's a real collision of very poorly or very intermixed identities in this episode, in a lot of different factors, maybe more than are immediately apparent. Because the obvious nexus of Agam, you have Riley, as you said, his identity being stripped away, and the question of, this is actually the second time where it's in question whether Riley is real at all, because initially when Buffy finds out that he's in the initiative, she doesn't even know if Riley Fing from Iowa is a real person. You have... I
was trying to find this episode earlier on the Wikipedia page, and I kept typing, and I was like, goodbye Idaho, goodbye Ohio,
goodbye. I knew you were going to say goodbye Ohio,
and then the next one I was like, goodbye Nebraska. And I eventually stumbled onto goodbye Iowa, and I was like, how do Americans name their states? Hopefully it's after like some bases.
It's a mix of things. Some of them are named after Native American tribes. I know that like Dakota is a Native American tribe.
I think Kansas or Arkansas more appropriately is as well, maybe.
Anyway, look, we'll never know.
Why not Arkansas?
Why not Arkansas?
I am confusion.
But yeah, so we have Riley, obviously big friction there. We had people like Lance Forrest, that's his name, who just really doubles down on his identity, and I think he's so unquestioning that I think it's bizarre that at the end of the season he's just like, I love being a demon now, I'm a demon, and with a big yellow head on him, I remember that. But otherwise, okay, so obviously we have Spike very specifically is included in this episode as something for Riley to be suspect of, in the sense of, why is the Slayer associating with demons? Why she's going to Willie's place to socialize with them? Is she potentially closer to the demon side than he? Because for him, it's either you're human and normal, or you're demon and bad. You know, he's kind of early season one for us in that regard.
He really trades in black and white concepts.
He absolutely does. And so he's questioning what constitutes a demon. Spike now is having to really bed down on the idea that he's kind of associated to the side of, you know, the White Hacks, because demons, including one who's listed in the credits as rough looking demon, beat the shit out of him because he's now working with the Slayer. So he is, if there's a spectrum, where does he fall on that now? And we obviously have a kind of a counterpoint note in there, but we have Tara, who we don't really know a lot about yet, who specifically sabotages Willow's demon locating spell, and we actually don't find out until I think it's episode 6 in season 5
why that is. The
reason she's done that is she is under the misapprehension that she is part demon, something which we were chatting about earlier, was a very fervent point of speculation in the fan community at the time, after she did this.
I think that was such an intriguing moment when we were watching that. I was like, oh, that's such a good little writing piece, you know, especially because they don't come back to it for so long. I find that really intriguing. It's
not openly sinister, but it's definitely, she's really the last character at the moment you expect to have something going on. And obviously Anya's there, who by and large is always considered to be a demon, an ex-demon, but she is fully human. So we've really blurred the lines of who falls where, and it's really starting to become, I think, more about, you are defined by what you do now in the next moment, what choices you make, rather than a more essentialist idea, which was, you know, necessary towards the start of the season.
Great use of the word essentialist, honestly.
Specifically. More useful towards the start of the show, where you have to have categories to really
build us versus the world, them and fear. Yeah, no, you're right. It's a complex and very nuanced show. I like it.
And then on the other side, you have Agam, who's made out of all these demon cyborg parts, shoving floppy disks into his chest to download,
just to swallow them down.
And be like, Riley Fing, Maggie Walsh's notes, and it's like, so you put a floppy disk in your chest to get like 5 kilobytes potentially of data, and then I found very upsettingly put another one in without taking the previous one out.
Maybe he has like a 5-disc changer in
just
there.
rattling around inside of all these floppy disks.
So queer stuff in this episode. Lots of great queer shit, because when Willow goes to visit Tara, she's like, oh hey, just let you know, I'm not only interested in you to do spells, I want to hang out with you just because I like hanging out with you, and A, that's really sweet, and B, spells equal sex.
Yeah, and then Tara's like, I've been thinking about the last spell we did all day in my room by myself.
And then Willow's like, oh, but can we do another spell? And she's like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just very cute, because it's like, oh, I know we're just hooking up, but like I also like you loads, and the chemistry there is really organic, I think. Very organic chemistry.
That's barely even a joke. But
no, I know. And Tara is already being characterized much more appropriately, or much less ambiguously, like, present, I want to say, which is good.
Sanding down some of the rough edges, maybe.
Yeah. She's no longer like...
Same thing I have with Anya.
Yes. Yeah. In reverse, though, I think Anya became weirder and Tara is becoming less weird in an appropriate way. But yeah, it was a really nice little like metaphor there, just in terms of spells and stuff. And I also I can't wait to talk about it when Tara's episode does come up, which is I think pretty much the only Tara episode really, which is Family. I think it's just called Family, is it? Where she confronts this idea that she might be a demon, and that being a huge metaphor for her queerness and her being told that she's awful on the inside, basically. But yeah, it's a good character arc, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where it wouldn't work if they didn't have chemistry. You can't force it. You can't just have her there being the queer witch. Yeah. I mean, so all you really need there is for Alison Hannigan to be a good actor, because who could ever stand in front of Alison Hannigan and not be like completely like devoted to her? She's wonderful and beautiful, and I love her. I would like to be her girlfriend. I can't remember where I saw this. I may be repeating some source that people have already seen, but I did see a quote from Alison Hannigan from an interview recently, or I saw it recently. The interview probably wasn't recent, but when they were asking her what they'll tell her kids about how she met their father. Yeah. And basically saying that it was when they recorded
How I Met Your Father.
Yeah, I think it was probably in the context of something like that.
Okay.
But she's saying that it was when they're recording the prom episode was when they actually spent enough time together that she was like, oh, I actually really like this guy, and then promptly didn't talk to him for a year because she freaked out after that. But that she can actually show the episode to her kids. It's like, this was
That's so nice.
Day we were filming. I realized, I liked him a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. The other nice thing that we found about Willow recently, nice or maybe not nice, I'm not sure. Joss Whedon just this last week has said that if he had wanted to write Willow bisexual, but it was already like a questionable choice to make her gay, and that basically he had to completely scrap the plans of making her bisexual. Yeah. I didn't believe him personally. I just fully don't think that's likely. I think it's too facile now, but also I don't think writing a character as a lesbian is a negative thing, especially this time.
I'll tell you why it's a nice thing that he said.
Sure,
I'll frame it for you, because it's obviously a very key thing here, and it always comes with the debate about Willow, is not portraying that inherently in a vacuum her being bi would be better than her being a lesbian. Even considering identities as having values is bizarre, but they definitely don't compete with each other and shouldn't. As much as the human nature is sometimes to make things into a comparative. Yeah. But in the context, underneath the headline, in the context of what he was saying, whether it's actually true that he thought of this at the time or not, was that he is aware that there is narrative and thematic questions there in terms of, that the way it's scripted and the way it's portrayed, it can be read as maybe reducing the possibility for people to be bisexual, for people to have dated men and then dated women later, and potentially the only option was that she was always lesbian or she has become lesbian, etc. And he's acknowledging that energy is there. He's acknowledging the representation that's necessary for lots of different kinds of people. And one of the concerns he said he had was that I do believe it was definitely a fight to get a gay character in this
100%.
context. And he said that there was a fear that it could be portrayed as either her as a bi person. I'm never quite sure which way around people are suggesting this, but that it was a phase. Either her being straight was a phase, or either her being gay was a phase.
Well, I mean, there's a very easy way to understand that, which is that, like, from a straight man's point of view, it's that if you are bisexual in a man, you're actually secretly gay, and if you're bisexual in a woman, you're actually secretly straight, because everyone secretly fancies is actually secretly underneath everything attracted to men only. Because
absolutely. But I just think that the issue of Willow's bisexuality, potential bisexuality, is one of the earliest examples of, like, or one of the most root examples of queer people potentially taking something and potentially finding negative in what is a good thing. And I think him making that statement now, it just has only potentially good energy to it. It's like trying to say something, trying to do something. Yeah, maybe he's exaggerating a little bit here or there, but there's no I think negative to trying to grope towards a better harmony of these identities in relation to each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. Getcha. So yeah, I'm ready to wrap up unless you have any other major points there, Julie.
Do I have any strong feelings or other things I want to say with this episode?
Strong feelings doesn't sound like you.
I would say overall I enjoyed it. I actually think it really, continued to make me more invested in what's happening in the initiative storyline than maybe I would have been going into this season. I think there's a lot there to really thematically get into. I think the structure of how the initiative actually works is so, like, Truman Show-esque. It's like, do not look behind this curtain, because there's really only 2 adults who work here, and once they're dead, it's kind of like a Lord of the Flies situation.
It's a big room, but it's just one room.
A tape up to the science song, as Crystal Method said. And yeah, there's I also want to mention that I called this seasons back that this is the episode that I always think of of Xander using his military brain to get into the initiative. And I would have guessed, I was almost certain there was a scene where he had to dress down a soldier, or be like,
that was in season 2. That was when him and Cordelia go to get the rocket launcher.
That's what I'm conflating it with. But I think this is the last time him having soldier brain is mentioned. You know? But this is him blowing the load on it, essentially. But yeah, I think and R.I.P. as well to Willie of Willie's Place.
Well, no, he's not dead. He gets mentioned again in another episode, but this is the final episode where he appears, which is a real shame because I do love Willie.
It's such a weird genre and note, which is occasionally I always think when you have magic shops and bartenders giving information, it's almost a nod to the fantasy route that Buffy sometimes doesn't had all that many of. It's almost like, here's this magic town we all know we live in, but only occasionally. Anyway, I liked him. Goodbye.
Okay, so Buffy Bits. Very few I have for this episode, I'm afraid, but here's what I do have. I forgot to have my notes open for this whole episode. Oops, a daisy.
Well, you obviously didn't need them because you got all this passion coming straight out of your off the top of your dome.
I don't have passion. Okay, so a couple of things. Final appearance of Willie. There is a Lou Reed song playing in the bar, which is nice. There's a Raining Men reference at the beginning of the episode, which I quite liked. Xander does say that he wants to have sex with Riley to go to the initiative. I
was about to mention that, actually.
Yeah. And then there's the Tara thing. Otherwise, very important to note, Adam's prosthetic work is so cool. It's just like, it really does look like his face has been ripped away to reveal a demon underneath, which of course is not the case because the demon's built on top of the human face. But it's such cool. It's such cool creature design.
Yeah, and the amount that the actor playing Adam is able to continue to articulate and speak and convey emotion from under prosthetics. Let me tell you, not easy to do. I've seen so many examples of that just not working, and I think for actors it can be a real nightmare to try and, because so much obviously expression comes from the face.
Well, I mean, like, the prosthetic makeup artist in Buffy Vampire Slayer have to have been the best at the time. They do a great job throughout the show. I mean, like, we rarely see prosthetics in the show where we're like, that's just bad. Sometimes we see them where we're like, that looks rushed or maybe under budget, or sorry, it's a low budget, but it's always passionate, it's always creative, it's always fun.
And something interesting I think they do with Agam as well is, like, we see the actor who plays Agam as a human in Primeval, and he doesn't seem particularly tall, unusually tall, and I think they always manage to portray Agam as feeling towering.
Yes.
Which I just think it's all very effective, because he's exactly the kind of thing that if you do it badly, you're like, I am not afraid of this at all. Okay.
So do you want to talk about some fashion notes?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Or do you have Buffy Bits for me?
I have some fashion notes. We can go straight into those.
Great.
Xander wears a t-shirt that says "I love dirt."
I believe it.
Which I quite enjoyed. And we also have a very significant headscarf from Buffy.
Yes.
Which Riley takes with him into his withdrawal.
Yeah.
In the military hospital.
And just on Xander note, it's been a while since Xander was really awful, which is fascinating. But so Xander, is wearing a stripy hoodie at one point, which was not bad. Mm-hmm. Willow is wearing a jumper with a star on it, which is also fine. Buffy is wearing, as she highlights herself, some yummy sushi pajamas, which are pretty great. When they're all having a little sleeping bag sleepover in Xander's basement, which is of course just like lovely.
Buffy dresses up as a
science lady,
exactly, to break into initiative.
It's the worst costume of all time. She puts on some glasses and a white coat, and she's like, I'm inconspicuous.
She gets straight into the heart of their operation, though, to be fair. Yeah,
she does. And at the very end of the episode, Buffy wears a really bad, like, shapeless pink top with a neck that looks like a wizard sleeve. It's inexplicable. It's like a boat top, but like a boat neck kind of like jumper, which just doesn't work. And finally, Mark Blucas has a much better haircut these days than he did at the beginning of the season, and it's been very gradual. I feel like they've been chopping it a little bit off at the time, but he has a reasonably normal haircut now. However, he looks like a sweaty emo for the whole episode of this, so he's unattractive.
He looks like Tom Hardy in Venom.
Yeah, he does.
For the whole episode.
He does.
Can I see, just as an aside, clapping emoji here, please. Where is Joyce Summers?
Yeah.
She hasn't been in ages.
I miss her so much.
And like,
this would have been a great episode for it as well.
The mother issues, yeah.
But also they could have gone hidden in her house and been like, oh, hey, Mom.
Instead of in the basement of Xander's absent but ambiguously abusive parents.
Yeah. Okay. So death count.
Yes, we had 3 deaths in this episode. We had Dr. Angelman, who gave a lot of information and then walked onto a skewer. We had
the boy,
unnamed boy with non-copyright infringing action figure. Was
cyborg action figure
split open like a blooming onion, presumably. And then lastly we had someone who is one of the initiative scientists was killed and thrown like a prop by Adam into the science pit.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, Joel, what rating are you going to give this episode?
What will I give this episode? I will give this episode an 8.4 self-insert floppy disks.
Oh, beautiful. Do you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought that I feel that the show is really benefiting from kind of the expanded ensemble at the moment. I think it could creak a bit under it. I'm like, no, like Tara has a little bit of time, Spike does, Anya has a funny line. I kind of know everyone. I feel like I care about the initiative stuff now, where I didn't at the start of the season necessarily. It wasn't convincing me. And I think that for all its production woes behind in some ways, I think the sudden pivot to Agam is kind of like, oh, I'm kind of sitting up in my seat again. It's like, oh, that's weird, what's going to happen next? Yeah. And I always like those moments in Buffy where they kind of take you by unawares to you. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I'm going to give it an 8.3 sex spells out of 10. I thought that it was messy in some ways, and it was kind of like, felt like a rushed transition into the Adam storyline, but I thought that they had a lot of interesting notes and they had a lot of interesting thematic points. And one of the things I love about Buffy is that, like, I was sitting around and I was thinking, okay, is this the interpretation of the episode that I think? And it's like, yeah, no, it really is. Like, all the stuff about Maggie and society and pressure and identity and structure and family, it's all written into the text. You don't have to scrape very hard to come to it. Like, it's not like a really radical interpretation of the text. It's a really well written, solid, surface level interpretation that is just communicated very effectively. I think it's great.
No, absolutely. And I think that's one of the, as we've mentioned before, one of the powerful things about Buffy is that, I would be of the opinion that the text doesn't belong solely to the creator, in the sense that if you can find meaning or theme in it, which either wasn't intended or maybe you have to dig for it, that's perfectly valid as well. But it's always a boon when it's like, no, like this show
Has
is
a very
written.
solid symbolic and metaphorical structure at its surface level.
Exactly. It's meant to convey these things to people who in an accessible way.
Yeah. Oh my God, we've run on so long. Cordelia Chase. It's 51 minutes.
Lorgy, turning 40. Cordelia Chase. Okay, I'll be as succinct as I can here. Although I do actually quite like this episode.
Yeah.
It was I've got you under my skin.
It was pretty good.
So essentially, the premise of the episode on Angel is that they discover that there is a possession happening in a family house, and it's kind of a red herring kind of thing. Is it the father who's possessed initially? Is it the son? And to be honest, it's just the Exorcist. They're trying to de-exorcist the whole situation. But it's strong for a couple of reasons. One is it was an episode that was originally written for Doyle, and from what I understand, kind of floundered in terms of like what's the point of this without Doyle, until they have a scene on the start of the episode where Angel accidentally calls Wesley Doyle, and then it becomes about Angel working very hard to try and save this family as kind of penance and trying to process kind of what happened to Doyle. And there's quite a lot of darkness to it in the sense that initially the father in the family comes across as kind of abusive because he's locking his children in. There's a lot of tense household scenes with Angel coming over with brownies and trying to find out what's actually going on. Then you eventually find that the boy is possessed, and then they go straight up do the Exorcist where they tie him down, his head spins around. It actually doesn't quite spin around, but essentially spins around. They do the ritual on him. But then this and so there's quite a bit of actual, I think, terror and tension there for the episode that it is. A lot of night shocks in kind of suburban houses where all you know when you're in a house,
I do,
and it's late at night, so it's like 12, 1 o'clock, you should be asleep, but you've turned on all the main lights for some reason because you know something's gone wrong. Do you know what I mean? You know that feeling of like an ambulance is outside, or someone's fallen down this, or something's happened. That's everyone's in pajamas. That's quite upsetting, I think. And then this weird but kind of interesting twist where when they actually exorcise the demon says that he was trapped in the boy because the boy is a pit of darkness. He's a sociopath, and he tries to burn his family down.
What's the conclusion of the episode? I can't remember now.
So basically, they managed, after getting this information from the demon, they kill the demon, they go back, and they manage to save the family from the boy before he burns them all to death. And then the child gets taken by social services, and Kate Lockley turns up for 2 seconds to you know, do that.
I don't remember the episode very well because we were watching it while I was giving Joel a haircut.
Yeah, absolutely. Good haircut, decent episode. Or is that the right way around? But one of the weird things with the episode is they do specifically just rip off The Exorcist for plot and world. Yeah. This is actually listed as the only example. So they go to a church, they're like, I want to find Father, whatever, and then no one's like, oh, you're a vampire, get out of this house of God, etc. It's the only time in Buffy and Angel that they indicate that the Catholic Church is like exists, has this relationship with the supernatural, will instantly recognize a vampire. It doesn't give that credence to it anywhere else. Funny. And also there's a missed opportunity there because just Angel has specific history with nuns and churches and all that kind of stuff, and he just doesn't acknowledge it.
There's also a nice aspect here where Wesley has a little bit of a character development moment because the demon talks about his fears about his father and how abusive his father was, and that kind of comes into it when he's trying to exorcise the boy and help the boy, and that's kind of his motivation there, and they're fleshing out his character a little bit. It's nice. Yeah, I think there's a lot of decent character development, a lot of softening of those edges. And although it's a slightly odd episode, and some of the acting I think is very bargain bin, I think it's a weirdly compelling episode, and it's a weirdly it's imaginative and it sticks in the imagination.
Yeah, for what you're watching, there's a mystery, and I'm like, for as much as I'm actually invested in this episode, I'm interested in finding out what's going to happen. So I would probably I'd give that 8 failed feminist gestures. Yeah, pretty good. I was going to give it 7 failed feminist gestures. Yeah, good. I liked it. What's next week on Angel? Do you know? I do not know. Grant. I did, and now it's been snatched from my brain. Great. It's always a loot box. You know, we'll find out next week what it was about. Great. Well, next week on Buffy Boys is going to be this year's girl, The Return of Faith. Great. Okay. Well, thanks so much for staying with us. We hope you're well. We hope you're safe. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Tell your friends. Tell your biomechanical demonoids. Did I say that last week?
Oh, I've no fucking idea. I don't listen to you when you say those things.
Tell your Jerry Seinfeld looking scientists. Have a good one. Take care, and we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys. La, 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 la. Great.
See ya.
See you.